As your party travels under the sun-dappled canopy of the Keonan Forest, a bouquet of scents fills your nostrils. The fragrance of flowers and ferns, surely, but also the earthy loam beneath your feet. You might talk jovially among your companions, eager to meet with the elvish magisters about the growing threat of ruin to the east. But your guide appears nervous, glancing out amidst the trees. And then you hear it, a soft, haunting melody on the breeze, and the sounds of the forest fall silent. Welcome to Whispers from the Phylactery, and if you're new, I like to talk about various aspects of tabletop role-playing games, from encounters to styles of play and systems in general, with a healthy dose of occasional rambling. So if that's your style, let's get into it. With elves, we all know the drill. Pointy ears, good with bows, they live forever and they love trees. Elves have been in fantasy forever, through a lot of different iterations, although our most recent one comes from J.R. Tolkien and his Lord of the Rings series. And they show up in a lot of different role-playing games, and they all end up feeling kind of the same. So today we're going to talk about how to make elves a bit more weird, wild, and just a bit different to kind of bring a bit of life into your games. So in a lot of systems, and Pathfinder, Dungeons and Dragons, even Dungeon World, elves often fall into the trap of being the elegant and ancient race, and there's not a lot else to them. They're graceful, mysterious, they're probably magical in nature, or fey in origin, and they come in a few flavors. You have your wood elves, your high elves, your dark elves, your frost elves, but none of them really they don't spark joy. We have to get rid of anything that doesn't spark joy. So, for me, elves should feel alien. I like the take that elves are sort of alien to the world. They are either fey or literal aliens, if you're going through Pathfinder, where they've come from another planet. Elves are immortal in a lot of systems, or they're close enough to it. When you're a human and something lives to be 1,000 years old, that's basically immortal to you, and to your grandparents and their grandparents and their grandparents. They might have dealt with the same elf all of their lives. So immortal's kind of wishy-washy. We're not going to worry too much about it. But the main thing is, a creature of that lifespan, they don't think like humans, or at least they shouldn't think like humans. So imagine living 800 years. You wouldn't really rush to do anything. You wouldn't value the same things that the lesser-lived races do. I mean, an elf might take 30 years just to write a book or to end a relationship, and that should make them feel out of sync with the world around them. Their lives appear on pause to the lesser-lived races just because an elf can spend a decade traveling the country just looking for a recipe they tasted once. And that wouldn't matter to the elf. That's a blip. But to other races, if they join them on this journey, that's a major part of their lives. In Pathfinder and D&D, this shows up a bit. Well, D&D, it depends on the setting, because there's so many different settings for Dungeons and Dragons. But a lot of the overarching focus for elves is a connection to fading magic, ancient ruins, and the first world. Either that's Fey or a different planet, like I kind of talked about before. And yeah, like I was saying, I do like the flavor that elves are an alien race. And this comes from Pathfinder, where they migrated to the playing world of Galarian, the default setting, from another planet through the use of arcane portals. And they had a great shining golden age before the elves retreated in the face of an oncoming cataclysm that their seers foretold through mystic prophecy. And when the elves all left, a lot of the elves that remain in the Pathfinder world were the descendants of those that chose not to leave. And they lost access to the magics that enabled their people to travel between worlds. So while they're still very arcane advanced and mystical, they do have that fallen splendor. Of course, some elves did come back after the cataclysm, and I believe that there's still, someone can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, there's still a link between worlds in the forest nation of Keonan, which is extremely xenophobic and not tolerant of outsiders. because the elves like seclusion. They want to be by themselves. They view the other races as lesser or less deserving. So there is a little bit of transmigration still, but their vast networks of teleporters across the planet are long since dysfunctional. This is actually one of the plots of an adventure path, Age of Ashes, where the party discovers a hubway to these ancient magical gates and is able to reawaken it. They can't recreate it, and the technology, or I guess not the technology, the arcane knowledge has been lost to recreate portals of this magnitude. But it does exist, and it's there to find or for you to put into your own stories. There's a gate that leads across the country to a far-off locale that was once important to the elves, either for trading and diplomacy, or it hosted access to really rare resources. The party might stumble across it from the other side and end up in elvish territory, or they might be tasked by the elves who are seeking to reactivate this gate. They need the party to travel to this far-off location and conduct a special ritual, or take an elf guide with them to conduct a special ritual that will reopen the gate on that side. Of course, the elves might not think anything about this, where the trip is 30 years, and their elf guide is doing it as a favor to one of their lords or nobles. But for the party, that's a massive undertaking, or it might be a succession of parties undertaking, where they hire new talent. If you start adventuring as a young individual and you're 50 by the time you get to your destination, that's a large chunk of time that you've lost out in your life. So I really like taking this weirdness aspect of elves, and we can crank it up to make something that is ethereal and odd. So giving elves a cultural a cultural weirdness. So you don't have to just say that elves love nature. What does it really mean when elves love nature? Do they talk to trees? Do they marry the dryads? They farm fungus that sings to them in their trance-like state. I say trance-like state. Some types of elves do sleep. A lot of the common mythology seems to be that elves enter a meditative trance. Maybe they use this fungus to facilitate that trance, and it's a very well-kept secret among elves, where you don't want to reveal this to outsiders because it grants access to... I know in Dungeons and Dragons, the elves have a dream network where they can communicate with their past lives, and elvish souls are recycled. Potentially, it's a fungus that allows them to do this, and it could be a plot point of a game that someone has stolen a batch of this fungus or is able to recreate it, and they are beginning to poison the elves' trance cycle. Actually, I like this idea a lot. Yeah, they're corrupting the reincarnation cycle and the ability for elves to speak to their past lives and garner knowledge. So now the party has to enter... Oh, no. They wouldn't enter this dream cycle. Okay, see? Rambling. I'm going to make a note about that for later, because I do like that idea. They need to hunt down whoever's done this and stop the corruption. Because the elves can't travel beyond their borders, or the party's put under a guise of some kind where they are not allowed to speak about it to anybody else. If they screwed up in the elvish cities and they owe a boon to a noble who wants to keep this all under the table. I do like this idea. Back on track to where I was kind of thinking before. So elves should be weird, even if we stick with the nature aspect. Maybe their cities grow out of living stone if they're a high altitude elf, or they're a cavern elf. So not all cavern elves have to be dark elves. Pathfinder didn't introduce just cavern elves, which are a darker skinned subterranean elf, but they aren't corrupted by the same things that dark elves are. Because D&D typically has the drow, even though the latest editions have been branching out from the purely evil matriarchal society of older editions. They do have a disposition to follow Lolth and the Spider Queen. Cavern elves are separate, where they're just sort of they were just trapped underground during the cataclysm. Their bodies adjusted to the darkness, and they are now different than their surface kin, where they might be a bit more albino, or they have lighter hair and eyes. They see better in the dark, but they become a separate culture, but they're not an evil culture. You know what I'm saying? And we can always go into that in a later video. If you want to hear about it, leave a comment, and I will make a video about my thoughts on specifically dark elves and cavern elves and the various types of underground. But back on track. Elvish cities might also only be visible in the moonlight. A doorway opens through a section of the forest, and you can only traverse during the moonlight, which restricts their access. A small outpost of a few huts might guard this doorway and give the appearance of a settlement to travelers and merchants, but really the bulk of the settlement me English good, and its people lie beyond this moon gate. Maybe the elves' language is music. They have a long time to perfect this, where they sing to each other, and maybe they don't even have written laws, where because no one forgets anything in the elvish society, they just pass it down from one generation to the next, and it stays relevant in the consciousness. And this also makes life as for an archaeologist very difficult. I mean, the thing I want to lean into mostly with this video is how long life changes people. Elvish culture should be deep and strange and kind of intimidating to non-elves. And I just want to touch on this here. My thoughts on elvish age rate, like elvish growth rate and birth rate. A lot of systems and a lot of tables all have different ways of interpreting this and doing their own spin on it. The one that I personally like the best, and what I use at my tables, is elves grow and reach physical maturity at the same rate as lesser races, typically the same as humans. They're a little bit faster than dwarves, and of course they're slower than goblins and orcs and all the fun stuff. Though I guess with the recent adjustments, orcs are pretty on par with humans. Cycling back. At 18 years old, an elf child and a human child will both be young adults. They are both biologically and mentally what we would in our lives consider adults to be. The difference arises in the culture. So in a human society, while a human might go to university or join a trade and be recognized as an adult in the community right away when they turn 18, the elves expect these younger individuals to commit to a trade or vocation until they've mastered it. And this can take 50 years, 60 years, sometimes up to a century. And they're only accepted as an adult in their community when they have mastered their first discipline, whether that's warrior, stonemason, artist, poet. Although things that become more vaguely defined become trickier. I could see a poet like their first great masterpiece that speaks to the hearts of many elves. Maybe it earns them accolades in the city. And then, so they're adults this entire time biologically and mentally, but it ends up being when they've completed their first vocation, they are of substantial use to their society and their people. Or it might be an elvish society that is closely entwined with humans. They might not consider their young individuals adults until the death of their first human friend, where it is this separation in thinking and time span that marks an elf as an adult. When they've gone through that loss and that I guess the pain of losing a friend, that they can really start to see the world differently on a different scale. So I like that, where it's not. I don't like where it's tied to elves grow slower, so they're an adult physically at 100 years or 50 years, whatever you want to be, some long span of time, and they're mentally slower for that entire time as well. It just doesn't make sense that a race so infused with magic and intelligence is so inept for so long. And this kind of ties into the birth rate, where my opinion on the birth rate is naturally elvish fertility is very low. They have a low chance of pregnancy and giving birth. So when couples are ready, because they are such an arcane society, they make the choice to have a child, and then they guarantee that result through either alchemy or ritual, some facet where they can say that we are ready to bring a new life in and nurture it for the next 18, 20 years, and then it goes off, does its own thing, becomes a member of the community. So it's very much a choice. And this also helps combat the decline, or helps, I guess. So in the event of a large-scale battle where a lot of elvish warriors die, they could boost their population, relatively speaking for elves, by a lot of couples accepting the responsibility of having new children. This still takes 18 to 20 years to have more able bodies, and then another full century, which is short to elf terms, for what they would consider a qualified warrior to go into war. But it does allow them to replenish their stock. And then, of course, you can also do the decline of civilization with the elves by something happened and the ritual is no longer working. Part of the party's quest is to uncover why the ritual is failing, or where this certain herb can be found that was the key to ensuring fertility, and it's now gone. It was destroyed in a battle or sabotaged by another race, or something happened and they're no longer able to guarantee offspring, and they're now relying on a very low birth rate just through chance. And in those kind of societies, I would see children that are born through chance and natural fertility would be omens of the gods, where it's a very low percentage. They are chosen to fulfill like a priest role or something else, where they are a gift, hopefully a gift, and they dedicate themselves either to the magical arts, the divine arts, something like that. This video is giving me ideas for games. I like that. And if you like them, you steal them. If you want me to expand on these ideas, leave a comment about that, and I'll expand on these ideas too. So, looking at role-playing for elves, both for players and GMs, though mostly from GMs. I can do another video just about the role-playing aspect. For players, I find it really dull if they're just playing the wise elf, like wise Legolas, the archer from afar, who can ride down a staircase shooting arrows from a shield skateboard. That was high fantasy. That was cool. Something I try to do in my games, but it was cool. Instead of just that, like, yes, I am very wise and I know everything and I have existed for 500 years, I'm an unparalleled archer. As I roll a 1 on my check at level 1. You could try being emotionally distant or overly formal, or even just passive aggressively polite. You're humoring the short-lived species by partying with them, by dealing with them in a mercenary contract or doing jobs for them. You're there. And it is not great for you, but it is what it is. You deign them with your presence. Of course, don't push it too far with your players or with your fellow players. I mean, we're all here to have fun, and if you're being a jerk at the table to the other players, they might not be having fun. Like, it's good to do it to NPCs and be a jerk to the GM, as long as they're having fun too and they're laughing about it. But if people are getting hurt feelings or tensions are getting high, that's not what we're here for. I mean, circling back, elves are ethereal and distant, and they don't view relationships the same way that shorter lived species do. They might consider the same relationships with other elves who they know will be around for a long time, hopefully. But when your human friend, you've known them for only a short 70 years, less than it might be like a quarter of your life, and then they die. And the struggle of becoming attached to someone when you know that they're going to pass on. I don't want to say that elves treat humans like pets, but it might be the same emotional baggage when you want to love something and give it so much of your attention and affection, just to know that for all these good times, there will be a time when it's really bad. That might be how they do it. It's so hard to wrap your head around an alien thought process that is so distinct from our own. For GMs, and what I like to do is use elf NPCs to show how time affects memory and morality. I mean, an elf might be upset about something that happened 200 years ago and demand compensation from the party before they agree to help, just because of a slight that one PC's ancestor made 200 years ago. The elf hasn't forgotten, and they're not super thrilled about it. Or the elf might not care about something that you would deem as urgent, because to them it's a short-term problem. If the orcish horde is going to destroy a dam that wipes out a human settlement, the elves probably still remember what the valley looked like before the dam was built, or they might have helped construct it 200 years ago, and they've already been there for 300 years. They know more about the valley when it was a valley than when it was a flooded river. So sure, the settlement might be gone, but the humans are adaptable and they're quick builders. So is it really a problem for nature to return to its course? And let's not forget that elves are dangerous, especially as NPCs. Adult elves are warriors, they're spellcasters, and they're ancient survivors. Each is a master of their chosen field. So if an elf chooses the path of the sword, they've likely practiced it for several lifetimes. And they've known more and forgotten more than your swordsman ever will. So elite elvish soldiers are something to be feared and respected amongst the human kingdoms. And there's a reason that Lord of the Rings and other fantasy elements do use that, where they are unparalleled archers and swordsmen. I haven't watched The Rings of Power. I believe that's what it is, the one that came out on Netflix. But I did see the scene where the elf was sparring with the humans, and she was impressed that one of them managed to graze her, and when she was half trying, and that was considered their training, was going up against an elf. So let's go into subverting elf archetypes. Elves are ethereal, and they're wispy, and they're wise and ancient. But let's do a little bit of shifting, where elves as villains. Elves can be cool villains, where they're cold, calculating ancient powers and manipulating younger races for their own gains from remote settlements. The elf might have laid contacts down for 100 years, helping families and doing things for a region, just to start slowly calling in favors, working factions against each other, as they're trying to get an artifact of some kind that the humans have been safeguarding, or that an ancient species safeguarded, and that humans have taken up residence in this location. They don't want to give it away and just say, hey, I need you to go get this thing. They want to control the region. There could be wild elves. You're traveling through the forest, and elves that you run into elves that are more disconnected from society. They're more fey than humanoid. They're very nature magic. They are instinct with the forest around them. When I think of nature elves and wild elves, I really think of the wood elves from Warhammer Fantasy. And I do like these elves where they are an intrinsic part of their forest, And they aren't arcane masters very much, but they are nature masters and they're druidic masters. And they are tied intrinsically to the spirits of the forest, where if one side perishes, the other does as well. And like in Warhammer, there might be some conflict there where the spirits don't always get along with the elves and the elves don't always get along with the spirits, but by and large, they are merged into a single purpose to protect their woodland realm. And this could just mean from people walking through it, where you're not qualified to breathe our air. You might find our settlement. You might find our children. We can't have you going back. Sorry. Like it's a short-lived life. You were only going to live another 30 years. It doesn't matter. We're going to exist for another 1,000. Your life is nothing to us. And these kind of elves are even more remote, where they are even more alien in thought, to where a lesser race doesn't even apply anymore. I do like those. And then you can always flip the scale the other direction, where what happens when an immortal people with knowledge of magic begin to embrace and build beyond magic into technology. So this comes up a lot in anime, where it's techno-elves. They've fused magic and technology together into magitech. They are achievable with great things. Their civilization reaches unheard heights, and then they usually die to a bomb. But it is a flip where their cities are wondrous and full of light and fast travel, because they have worked metal to such a high degree that they're able to produce phenomenal results. And this can be in a world where it's typically low fantasy, medium high fantasy, and these elvish enclaves are very remote and hidden. That's kind of a thing I like to do with elvish communities, is for the most part they're remote and they're not accessible by other races, except unless it's like a trading village on the outskirts of their territory, or you're very lucky to be invited inside of their territory. Otherwise you're going to have a lot of arrows pointed at you if you try to sneak inside. So I think there's a lot of room to get creative with elves once you sort of just ditch the Tolkien template, and you start opening it up to a bunch of different inspirational sources and just let your imagination run wild. So I guess my final thoughts on elves aren't boring because they're old. They're boring when we forget what being old means to a race. Whether you're running a game or building a character, ask yourself, what does 500 years of memory do to a person? And how does that make them dangerous, powerful, or just weird? More alien in their thought. So an anime I really like is Freerun, Beyond Journey's End. And I do recommend it. It's slower. It is slower paced. There's action in the second half when things start to pick up. But it is a very day-to-day approach on how an elf deals with time and loss after her friends have passed on, and she never really thought about what that would mean, where she exists in a world without them, or the pain that comes with that as she tutors their children and their disciples, and they give her new meaning and help her explore what it means to feel. I really like it. It explores a bit more of the emotional impact and what that might do to a person. It's not perfect, but I did like it. So if you have a favorite elf NPC or campaign where elves played a highlight role, drop it in the comments. I want to hear all of your elf takes and maybe add them to my reservoir of arcane knowledge. And if you want more monster breakdowns, lore dives, and ways to keep your world strange, hit that like button and subscribe, because it helps all the time. And until next time, adventurers,